Welcome to today. We're gonna troubleshoot, right?
Troubleshoot.
We're gonna troubleshoot,
Troubleshooting episode 2.
right? Is it episode 2 or is it episode 1? Because the other one was like an introductory.
Well, it was an episode though. We
I
was telling people what we're gonna
guess.
talk about.
Okay. So we're gonna troubleshoot, and we talked about things. We were looking at statistics and things that deal with relationships and marriages, and why do so many marriages fail? Um, why? Because they're saying now, Garland, that marriages are failing like at a rapid speed. They're saying that more than 50% of marriages will fail. And not just 1 or 2 years. They're talking about like 20 years plus. That's huge. I think about like our parents, like your parents been married what?
I think it's been, I think 50 years. Yeah,
Yeah, like 52
yeah,
years. My parents been married like 52
over 50 years.
over 50 years. Like you is getting times that we don't even hear that anymore. So one of the things that they said that affects marriages a lot is the ability to communicate with one another.
Mm.
I believe this is something that everybody kind of struggles with, because don't you agree, like when you're dating, when you're in a dating phase, everything that's going on, you're just in, I don't know, la la land, everything
Yeah,
is perfect.
yeah. At that time, everything, all the jokes are funny.
Yeah.
Everything that he says is funny, and they're supposed to be funny. And you spend a lot of time together. You can't get enough of each other because it's new. It's like the honeymoon
Right.
relationship.
Right.
In the beginning, dating is like the honeymoon of relationship.
Right. And, when I look at our marriage, we've been married 22 years. Communication can be a challenge, because number one, we are two different people.
Mm-hmm.
Like, just to even get this podcast together, it could be a challenge.
We should do an episode on that.
Right. I wish we could take people behind the scenes for that, because because you may want something one way, I may want something one way. Just to do it is just learning how to communicate effectively with one another to get to the purpose or the vision or whatever you're trying to do together. And so over the 22 years, I think one of the things that we had to try to navigate through is thinking about the other person.
Mm-hmm.
Not being selfish. What is, like not just making it about you or me, but actually thinking about the other person. Would you agree with that?
Well, yeah. I mean, if you really think about it, if two people all at the same time always focus on giving the other person what they want, then you probably would never even have an argument. If you 100% try it at all times, and no one can do that though. I mean, it's human nature to not always focus on everybody else. Sometimes you want what you want when you want it the way that you want it. So in relationships, the challenge is to put yourself second,
Mm-hmm.
and to not always think about what's being done to you, but how are you doing things to the other person. So
yeah, and I also think like once you say like it's very important to learn how that person communicates. Like that's when I remember early on in the marriage we learned about love languages and different things like that. Something that you may think that you're doing for me, I may not think that way, or vice versa. Is learning the love language and being intentional. I think for communication, we feel that it's okay to just talk to each other any type of way. And I think what we have to learn is that when you're building a family, especially when you're raising kids don't do what's really taught. They do what's caught, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
So if they grew up in the house and mom and dad can never communicate, never can accomplish anything, then that's going to continue from generation to generation.
Yeah. When you talk about love languages, it's similar to when someone is bilingual. They learn how to talk different languages. So, so you have to, well, think about it like this. If you spend your whole life speaking one language, and then when you get into a relationship, they speak a different language, sorry, it's going to be hard for you to communicate.
Mm-hmm.
So in love languages, it's important because if the way that you look at love is by receiving gifts all the time. So obviously that's the way that you're going to show love because that's the way you get it.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're buying someone that's gifts all the time and that's not their love language, then they're not going to think that you love them, or vice versa. If a better example, because a lot of people are into gifts, if your love language is words of words of affirmation, where you need somebody to tell you that they love you all the time.
Mm-hmm.
But another person may say, I show you I love you by what I give you.
Mm-hmm.
And because they need to be given things, they want to give things. So in relationships, you have to not just be bilingual, but multilingual. You have to be able to speak different love languages because most of us have more than one.
Right.
You know, so in order for me to show you love, I have to learn how to speak to you in the language that you speak.
Right. And I think when I can relate it to our marriage, I believe, to me, that our communication changed or got improved. I'll use the word improved. Our communication improved when we began to learn more about our personalities,
Right.
and why we are created the way that we are, or why we are a certain way. Because like in our relationship, I'm very direct, I'm very to the issue, and then this is what we have to do. And you're totally different from that. And I think until we learned how everybody was, you're like I'm more broad, you're more detailed with things. So in communicating, something I say can come off of one way, something that you say can come off another way. But I think that when you are intentional of learning about why you are a certain way, you could be more effective in talking and communicating with somebody else.
I think one of the challenges that we had in the beginning is because we are both direct.
Mm-hmm.
I've been told that, and even when I've had you in my interactions with other people, you would pull me to the side and say I was kind of may have come off rude because I'm just directly straight to the point. But I think because we're both direct, what happens is you're direct and broad and I'm direct and detailed.
Mm-hmm.
So there were a lot of times where I would be like, I don't understand what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
And I know a lot of relationships, a lot of people can relate to that one person is saying something and they were 100% sure that they're being clear. 100% sure. You can't tell me if you put me on a lie detector test, if I'm being clear about what I'm saying to you, I would pass it.
Right.
But I still don't understand it.
Right.
Because it's too broad.
Right.
So I have to ask questions, and then you have to have the patience to answer the questions so I get a full understanding, because I never want to respond to anything if I don't fully understand it.
Right.
Because that's when miscommunication comes in. And that's one of the challenges that we've always had to overcome because of that barrier and that communication that we have, the style that we do it. My detailedness and your broadness, overall picture, we have to come to a common area and say, you know what, I need to break this down so he can understand it. Not saying that I'm slow, but
right,
I need the details of it so I make sure that my response is exactly what I want to say and I'm not misunderstood.
Right. And the thing about when you're in a marriage and in relationships, I think you have to be intentional, because like I know for us, what we had to really do when it came to communication. I remember like we took actually a personality test. Remember that?
Yeah.
We took a personality test to learn how we like, okay, now I get it. While I'm like this, and the test talked about weaknesses and strengths and different things like that. And for me, it gave me a more clearer picture. And I was able to understand like, oh, okay, now I get it why I'm like this. Because when you're communicating with somebody, sometimes you feel that if somebody doesn't communicate like you, that they're wrong
or something's wrong with them.
or something is wrong with them. And that's the thing I think what happens in marriages a lot of times, it's always that you're the problem. It's something wrong with you, instead of looking at ourselves first and then trying to take it from there and figure it out, because it's so easy to look at somebody else and say, I'm this way because of you. But really, you should never give anybody that much power to say that you are a certain way because of them, because we make a choice in that.
Yeah.
So,
and what it really comes down to, when you think about it like that, is it's a form of selfishness, because I want to mold you into another copy of me, and you should do everything like I do it. One of the things that really get people in relationships and marriage, especially in marriages, and on those first couple of years, is little quirky things like not putting the toilet paper on the right way, or not folding the clothes a certain way, or not making the bed up when you get up. It's like if you don't make your bed up when you get up, then you're a slob.
right.
And those things have a big effect, and it's really based off of your personality, to how you were raised, the culture that you were raised in, and all those things can be challenges that you have to deal with. And understand that just because somebody doesn't do something like you doesn't mean that something's wrong with them. And for you to expect them to be like you and getting upset because they're not like you, the problem is not them, the problem is you in that situation.
Right.
Because we need to work together to get better.
And I think the danger in when it comes to when you make a choice to say, I'm not going to work on my communication, we're not going to work on our communication, is that silence comes in. And somebody out of that relationship is going to need to talk. And so if the house is always silent, then also too, that's when a person may start talking to somebody else. Just different things can open doors, let me say. So it's always good when you make an intentional decision to say, you know what, if we're going to make this relationship, this marriage work, we have to work on how we address each other, how we talk to each other. We have to go sometimes, girl, and you even have to go back into like your childhood to understand why you are the way that you are. It could be something that you've seen growing up that can affect, your marriage or your relationship. And a person has to be honest with that, to say, this is why I am, and then make a decision to change it, especially if it's not healthy. Because sometimes in marriage, a person could come and say, well, this is me. You have to accept me just like this. Yes, true, I do. But if it's not something that's healthy or healthy for us, or if it's hurting us, then why not change it? And I think that's when the humility and everybody puts down their egos and say, you know what, we need to change. We need to do better. And yes, it is difficult because we know that firsthand, but it starts with baby steps. You take one step and then you keep taking steps, and then sometimes you will fall back, fall off, but you pick yourself up again.
Well, when we say words like that, you should accept me for who I am. That's always true, but it's like a double-edged sword, because to accept you for who you are means you have to accept me for who I am as well. So if you respect me as who I am and accept me for who I am, then you're willing to give me what I need, which means that you're going to have to change some things that you do.
Right.
So that's the other side of that coin, because when you don't have the capacity to be willing to change and only want your end to be accepted, because to accept me also means not just what I do, but what I need. And if I'm accepting you, I'm accepting not just what you do, but what you need. So if you accept what me and what I need, it's going to change what you do, and vice versa. So my actions are going to reflect my care for you and what you need from me, and accepting you that you're the type of person that needs me to always say I love you, or needs me to always verbally affirm you, or always give you a gift, whatever it is. I know that's what you need. Then I have to adjust my actions and meet the need that you need.
Right. And that's good, is to get into that point where you really have to, the thing about marriage is that if anybody that's listened to this, if you struggle with, I think we all struggle with a little bit, but marriage is something that you cannot be selfish and make it.
No.
You can't make it in a marriage and just make it all about you. You have to put it also on that other person. Now make yourself a priority, but also put yourself on to the other person. So Garland, what are, like, just still talking about us when it's dealing with this communication, we talked about the personality, taking that personality test, because we were intentional that we had to change the way that we communicate with one another. Second of all, I think the thing is that you have to have a desire for peace. One of the things that I've noticed is that sometimes a person, if things are not chaotic, they're going to think something is wrong. You ever meet somebody like that?
Yeah.
Like, if a situation is peace, they have to almost self-sabotage it, because it's like, and it could be because, they could have been raised by parents that argued all the time, or did not communicate, or just, everybody fussing. But you can have a house, not a perfect house, but you can have a house of peace. And you have to make a decision to say, do we want peace in the house?
Yeah. It has to be priority.
Right.
To have peace is not something that just happens. You have to make it happen.
Right.
And, outside of relationships, outside of personalities and that, there's also the background. You mentioned like the house that they grew up in, and we don't sometimes recognize the strongholds that we have built on our lives over the years of what we've seen and been exposed to. Because like you said, more is caught than what's taught. So if you grew up in an environment where, and maybe not just arguing, but maybe you grew up in a house where your mom never had to do anything and dad took care of everything. And your husband grew up in a house where it was two people working. That's a challenge, because now your mind is telling you that if a man doesn't take care of everything, then he's not a man. So obviously those are attributes that women that are in that situation may look for when they're dating. But if you happen to find yourself in a position where you're married and you realize that, man, I got to get me a job, or I got to cook, I got to do something, and now your end of the bargain is not what you thought, what you thought it should be. You thought it would be much easier than what it is. So now you have to realize that the reason that you think like that is not because that's the standard that is for everybody. It's the standard that you grew up seeing. So now you're gonna have to pivot, because now you're in this marriage and you're gonna have to meet the need that needs to be met in order for this family to survive financially or whatever it may be. But realizing where you've come from can have such an effect on where you are now, how you think about it. That's another level of communication that needs to be worked on, because you have to be intentional if you want change.
Right. And I think that that's the thing that we don't really think about, I think, when we're dating and getting married sometimes, because that's not really talked about.
Right.
I remember when I dated, and my mom, she would say,
wait, you dated somebody before me?
Well, but she would always say that, find somebody, Farida, or look for somebody, or when somebody comes around, look to see what type of background they come from. She would always put that in my ear, look to see what type of background they come from. Not not saying, and I don't want to say this like in a way if somebody comes from a different background than you, that you can't have a healthy marriage. That's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying that to say, to be able to identify where everybody comes from. So when things come up, you know how to work through that, which should be done like in marriage counseling. You know, like what people don't know is like we went to counseling before we ever got engaged.
Yeah.
It was couples counseling. Then we went to when we got engaged, premarital counseling. Then we went to counseling the first year of our marriage. But I believe the reason why we took marriage so seriously over the years is because of where we come from. That's what we've seen. You come from a strong marriage. Your parents still married. I come from that strong marriage. So that's what I mean about those backgrounds, you know. So that's something that we say, you know, we are going to be intentional because this is what we've seen. You know, this is we both come from, we were blessed to come from that 2-parent household like that. But I think when you can identify if somebody does not come from a certain background than you, then you could say uphand, you know what, this may be something that we need to work on together. Because let me tell you something, it's gonna come up. The issue is going to come up somewhere. It may be covered for a minute, but it's gonna come up.
Well, one of the things to avoid, especially when you are trying to have peace, is acting out of emotion. So when you do know the background and you do know the struggles that may have come from where they come from, it's real easy, especially in the heat of a disagreement, to throw that up. You just like your mama. You just like your daddy. And that causes damage that takes years to be repaired.
Yes, words
and
hurt.
Anybody that's watching this, take heed, because if you react out of anger and use someone's past or their family against them, it will take a while for them to get over that, man or woman. And we never want to get to that point. When you know the struggle, you work to make things better, but you never take that struggle and use it against them.
Right.
Because nobody has a choice of where they come from.
That's right.
Nobody had a choice of the parents that they had, the family life that they grew up in. So we never use that against each other. We recognize the strengths and the weaknesses of our family that we came from, but we don't use that against each other, because that's another level of miscommunication that can lead to damage that will take years to repair.
Right. And you know, we're really almost done. But you know, the thing about it, Garland, is that somebody is listening to us. It's a couple listening to us, and they're in a relationship, or somebody's listening to us and they're saying, you know what, we don't have the communication skills right now. And we have said so many negative things to each other. We have, just talked about each other or whatever, because you do argue sometimes in marriages. You know, I don't know of anybody that hasn't had an argument in a marriage.
I know some people that said they don't, but
okay, whatever. But
we'll see.
Okay, whatever.
Lord knows.
But you do. And I think here going forward, this could be a time to really everybody put their egos down and say, I'm sorry. And come together and say that it's time to do better. And I know that we have different people that's going to be listening to us, but me and you can both say this, you know, you got to put God in your marriage.
Yeah.
I don't know what people do that don't have God in the marriage and able to worship together and, you know, and able to pray together, you know, because that is very, very important, because God, when we pray to God, he gives us so much insight. You know, he gives us wisdom. God makes our heart, you know, helps us to make our heart soft again. And what happens when we lack the communication skills, our heart gets so hardened. You know, and we can't stand the person, and, you know, and we want to fight all the times. But Garland, me and you both can probably agree to this, being pastors. How many times has life come by and somebody was gone just like that? And that person said, I wish I would have made peace. So as you're in that situation, you think about that. What if this was the last day or just the last time you were talking to that person and something happened? So we have to be so very careful
Mhm.
with our words and what and how we react, like you said,
Mhm.
and still be in the mindset to just say, you know what? I'm sorry. I shouldn't have did that. And after you say I'm sorry, the person has to say, okay, you may not be able to say I forgive you right away, but you could say something like, okay, I'm working through this.
Yeah.
Because sometimes people can do things to you over and over. You automatically can't say I forgive you. You have to wait a minute.
Mhm.
And I'm able to say that is to say, you have to say, okay, wait a minute. Let me work through this. But eventually you have to release that so you can go forward.
That is the most important thing of any conflict is the moment after the apology. That is a
The moment after
moment
apology,
that
yes.
everything it tilts in the balance because your response to that can either be can either have an outcome of peace or it will take what is already going on and make it exponentially grow even higher. Because if someone, either person, humbles themselves enough to apologize, what they've done is they've made themselves vulnerable. And when you're vulnerable, if you are taken advantage of, it's going to be that down south. They used to say they would call it a long time. They would call it a month of Sundays. It'll be a month of Sundays before they ever make themselves vulnerable again. So that moment is them saying, I want to have peace. Even if you don't believe that they're sorry, and they may not even really be sorry, they just want peace. But at the moment that that's done, peace is more important than being right.
Yeah.
So I'm going to apologize so we can move on.
You move on, right?
And you reach a point where peace has to be your priority. And being right or having peace, sometimes you just want to be right, but eventually you're going to get tired of having to be right and you're going to be like, I want peace.
Yes.
And you don't want that time to go on where it's weeks and months or even years for some people of going back and forth or having this tension and contention all the time, because God didn't create us to be fighting each other.
Yeah.
And I always tell men, young men when they ask me about marriage and they say, well, everybody says that it's so hard or this and that. And I say, well, to be honest with you, no one on this earth has the ability to make you more angry than your spouse because they know you.
Yeah.
And nobody on this earth knows you better than your spouse, not even your mama. Because if you've been married for a year, your wife knows you better than your mom because who you are with your wife is different than you are when you're around your mom. Who you are with your wife or your husband is who you really are. So I said, once you understand that, then you can navigate through it, because don't get surprised if you find yourself being upset about stuff that you were never upset before.
Yeah.
Because this is a different relationship now. And when you realize that, now you can build from it. Yes, it may be challenges. Yeah, it may be hiccups here and there where, you feel like you're not understood or you don't understand. But if you make peace your priority, then you have to be intentional about having peace.
Right.
Not just expecting it to happen, but being what the Bible says, a peacemaker. You have to make peace.
Right.
And that's going to take tools. And when you get tools, you got to put in work. But at the end of the day, it's all worth it.
Yeah, it is. You know what, you're right. It is all worth it. And as we about to, close off, I hope that we were able to give some people nuggets on the communication or give you more to think about in communicating. I just always recommend this. If you are in a marriage or relationship and and you really, really want to be intentional, there's nothing wrong with going to talk to somebody either. That's the thing. There's nothing wrong with going to talk to somebody to help you through it. Either finding, going to your local church, finding a counselor, or if you have a marriage, one of your a marriage mentor or somebody like that, a couple that can take out the time to mentor you in your marriage. That is always good too, because sometimes you may need help.
Mhm.
You know, you may need help to navigate through some things. But we just want to just be a blessing to everybody and just help people. You know, when it comes to communication.
Yeah.
Our communication is not perfect.
No.
Nobody's is.
Nobody.
But it sure is a 300% better than what it was, because even after 23 years of marriage, almost 23 years of marriage, we're still learning each other.
Yeah.
You know,
because we're ever growing and changing.
We're ever growing and changing, but not for 1 minute would I ever regret the life that we have been so blessed to build together by staying in there, staying the course, and being intentional about making our marriage better.
Yeah.
This is the end of troubleshooting for today. See you for our next episode, which will be real soon.
Okay.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.